try that, this new rod, see how far it'll go.
Well, I've had a couple of goes with it off the ground. It's up to you now to give it a bit of a pasting.
See what it'll do.
That's it.
That sounds fair to me.
I'll get well out of the way because I know you use the new style.
That's the current style. Or near the current style.
Just chuck on the ground. Be all right.
Yeah. There we go. Right to the first attempt. It's not bad at all, is it?
How much line left on the reel?
Oh, I'd say about 60, 70 yards, something like that.
You could take like 220, 225, something like that.
Or for a reel that big, that's good.
Especially not bad for a rod size for and the materials that are used, some of them are actually quite interesting. This is a piece of cane, it was used about 1917, 1920, 1925, and people in the 1950s were still using it.
Oh,
bloody hell.
There you go.
Further than last time, I think.
Yes, it might have been a little bit further. I didn't quite get it.
Half an hour's working, about 2 minutes flat. Professional, fine. But why should you bother to build your own rod? If you think about it for a little while, it's fairly obvious. Pride of ownership comes into it, but if you build your own rod, then you can specify exactly what you want. And if you think about it, you'll know the reasons why you want it. Choice of blank, choice of colour of thread, choice of pattern of rings. All these are things that you take into account when you move into building a custom fishing rod. The history of surf casting in this country was really popularised in the late 50s, early 60s by Leslie Moncrief, but it goes back a lot further than that. And the materials that are used, some of them are actually quite interesting. This is a piece of cane. It was used about 1917, 1920, up to 1925, and people in the 1950s were still using just ordinary Burma canes. Another development was split cane. This is an old 1950s split cane beach caster, a lot shorter than we're used to these days. That was made by Cliff Constable in Bromley in Kent. Glass fibre was not developed until around about 1947-48, after the Second World War. The first tubular glass rods were made in America in the Connellan factory. They were only predated in glass fibre days by the Howell process, which is the process Shakespeare used for their ugly sticks. And then, talking about the past, we're now on to present and the future. This is the latest material. It's a mixture of carbon fibre and glass fibre and is used to produce today's modern surf casting rods. When you get involved in building your own rod, selection of the materials is important. This is a piece of cheap Korean glass fibre. If you watch, just a squeeze, and you can see it going oval. By comparison, this is a piece of the latest Ziplex material, slightly smaller in diameter, and quite frankly, I haven't got a hope in hell of making that go oval. And these are both about the same wall thickness. So check your blank carefully. And aim for quality all the time. As surf rods have improved over the years, the major improvement has been a decrease in the weight. Now, as the weight decreases, obviously, the amount of equipment that the rod has to carry, the load that the rod has to bear, becomes more and more critical. So, rod rings that perhaps 10 years ago were the accepted norm, such as these, are still an acceptable ring, but that set weighs 3/4 of an ounce. If we remove those now and replace them with the set that we recommend for this project, they weigh 1/2 ounce. That's quite a fair saving. And to give you an idea of the difference that that makes to a rod, one size 25 is the weight of the difference between the two sets. This rod's equipped with a set of the lightweight rings that we recommend, and as you can see, and probably hear, it's got a very quick recovery. If we now attach the difference in weight between the two sets of rings, in this case this is a B&H G25, which exactly weighs the difference. If we now try and waggle it, as you can see and hear, it's gone all floppy. So there's the difference between the two sets of rings. And if we use the lightest possible load, it means we don't have to hit the rod so hard to cast as far, which means your bait stays much more attractive to the fish because it's still on the hook and not covering some granny's hair. Simple logic and our little experiment have now shown us which set of rings to use. So now what we'll do is grind the ends of the rings using a carborundum stone, and then we'll show you how to attach the rings to the rod. Right, our blank has arrived in a nice, neat, triangular cardboard tube, which is exactly what we need for our next part of this particular project, and we're going to recycle it. So what we're going to do is hack off a couple of pieces of triangular, and this will be our amateur rod building machine. Support the blank we'll need two, so here comes the second one. And once you've sliced this, take each individual piece, and you now need to measure off approximately 4 inches from each end. If you make a nice mark with your thumbnail, and you've got to cut a V, that's one for the tip, one for the butt. Do these ones to approximately the same spacing. It's not critical. And there we have our amateur rod building machine, ready to roll. Right, this particular situation is a bit unstable, obviously, so nice convenient hole just shove some old lead weights down just to stabilise it. That's much better. There we are. Now we're ready to go. We've reached the stage now where we can think about attaching rings to this particular rod blank. But before we do that, to make whipping much easier, we can grind the ends of the rings, feather them down so that when we do the whipping, the thread will climb up and over the foot smoothly without any nasty, horrible gaps. So grind it down on a rough carborundum stone. There we are. That's it. That now goes in with those. Now, let's have a look at the blank. When you unpack the rod from the box, you'll notice that the tip ring's already fitted. There's two reasons for this. One, it makes it a lot easier for you. And two, we've already lined the tip ring up with the spine of the rod. Now, the spine of the rod is where, when they roll the carbon and glass cloth, there's always a slight overlap. And where the overlap is obviously going to be the stiffest part of the rod, and that is where the rings sit. You will find this by pressing down and just rolling, and you will actually feel the rod jump under your fingers there. And if you'll notice, if you now look where the tip ring is, that's absolutely spot on. Saves you having to do it, and it ensures that it's in the correct position. When you examine the rod, you'll notice there are some gold marks on the blank. Please don't wipe them off, as they indicate where the rod rings go. Note there's not the foot, but the ring itself. So line the ring up carefully with the gold spots, and then just tape the ring to the rod using a sliver of masking tape. Don't use sellotape, because sellotape leaves a residue. And when you're putting the rings onto the rod, ensure that the smallest ones obviously go towards the tip and the largest rings go towards the butt. Sounds self-evident, but you'd be amazed what I've seen in the last 20 years. This is Britain's record shore-caught flounder, caught by Barry Sokol a couple of Januaries ago in the River Tean. One of our local painting anglers, very successful. Nice though the chap is, we're not actually interested in his photograph. What we're interested in is the piece of paper it's printed on, because that is a certain ratio, 1 by 1.4, which is the ratio that virtually all modern paper is cut to. Now, if we use this ratio for the length of the whippings, then we'll have a good-looking rod. As an example of what I consider a poor-looking rod, in the middle here we've got an ancient rod. And if you look here, the whippings are the same length as the diameter of the blank. And they look unfinished. Whereas if you look at this one here, at the front, you'll see got roughly the same diameter, but the whippings are 1.4 times the diameter of the blank, and they look classy. So the simple way, whatever the diameter of the blank is, in this case it's 1.5 centimetres, multiply that by 1.4, in this case 1.5 by 1.4 comes to 2.1. So the length of the whipping for this particular ring, 2.1. Sounds pernickety, but if you want to build the best, then you've got to be pernickety. Now we're ready to whip the ring. First thing we need, a loop of line. This is to finish the whipping with. So just tie a simple knot, simple overhand knot will do, and cut off your loop. I like to have a couple ready, because they do occasionally break. Pair of scissors, and we're away. Take your thread, lay your thread across the rod, reach underneath. If you're doing the left foot, reach to the right hand side, bring the thread up, determine exactly where the first piece of thread is going to go, then cross the two over, like so. Put your thumb on, roll the blank away from you, then put your left forefinger on, roll the blank a bit further, put your right forefinger on, transfer your left forefinger, and now you should have 2 complete turns of thread which will actually hold. Just for safety, put another couple of turns on, making sure that there are no gaps appearing like that. If you get a gap, just go backwards and roll the thread up against the previous turn. Stop the blank rotating by putting your right finger on, lift the spare thread, which we don't require anymore, take your scissors, trim off close. Now rotate the blank while keeping the thread under medium tension, about 4 or 5 ounce pull on there, that's all. Now you'll have to start off going fairly slowly when you first start doing this. I've been doing it for quite a number of years and I can go quite fast. Now when you approach the ring foot, take your time and the thread will climb up the ring foot, which you've already prepared, all by itself. There we go. Now all we've got to do is to get rid of the masking tape that we attach the ring to the blank with. And when it comes to finishing the whipping, you need to get the end of your thread buried underneath itself, which sounds a bit crazy, but all you have to do is take one of these loops of monofil, tuck it underneath the next loop and then whip over the monofil. So you've got around about a dozen turns. Trap the thread with firm pressure. You can now put the spool of thread down, take your scissors, point of no return here, cut the thread. Put the end of the thread through the monofilament loop and now just gently pull the monofilament loop right the way through. That will pull the thread with it, like so. Now, a couple of tugs will actually open up a gap. Take a scalpel or similar sharp blade, just press down in the gap and the end will just fall away. Now, close the gap just by pushing gently with your thumbnail. If there are any tiny gaps or imperfections, just a gentle rub like so will make them vanish. In this case I can remove the tape. As I said earlier, I'm being very fussy with this particular one, but you don't need to be that fussy. You can normally judge roughly 1.5 times the diameter of the blank should be the length of the whipping. Whippings are as easy as that. Right, we're going to do the other whipping. A piece of tape up against the calipers, which is my measure of length of whipping. And we just roll the piece of tape round just to give us a guide. There we go. Now we fetch the whipping thread, and this time we work opposite. So we lay the thread over, pick it up this time, as it's the right hand foot, we pick it up on the left. Cross the threads over, put your thumb on, finger on, rotate, thumb on, finger on, rotate a bit further, thumb on, finger on, rotate, thumb on, finger on, rotate, until we've got 2 or 3 crosses there, actually trapping the end of the thread. Now, put a few more on for safety. Pick up the end of the loose thread, that's now waste. Trim off with the scissors, And now away we go again. Remember, you take your time, and when you get towards the foot of the ring, the thread has got to climb up the foot. Take it nice and steady. There's a tiny gap there, look, see it? Go back, do it again, you know. You might as well do it right as do it wrong. Now we remove the thin piece of tape. It was actually taping the ring to the blank. And we'll just finish off. And keep it all under medium tension, about 5, 6, 7 ounces pull on the thread, not much more. And we're getting towards the point now where we can take our loop of monofilament, just tuck it underneath. This time the knot is to the right, the loop is to the left. And around about a dozen turns. Make sure you've left plenty of room here. See, there's plenty of space here for a couple more turns if you need it. But that's about right. Finger on to hold everything in place. Put your spool down, pick up your scissors. Point of no return. Cut your thread. Now, the end of the thread is now put through the loop. If we now pull on our monofilament loop, you can see that end go underneath, like so. Take the end, pull to the left, opens up a gap, and we can now take our scalpel, trim away, and then just with your nail, snug up so there's no gaps. Gentle rub just to smooth everything out. I think I can claim perfection. Because of the nature of the blank, obviously it gets much slimmer towards the tip, and we're using single leg rings, so we can't use this 1 times 1.4 ratio. So what we do is we measure the length of the foot of the single leg ring, double it, and that's how long the whipping is going to be. Now, you don't have to use calipers like I am. You can use just an ordinary ruler. Same method applies. We're whipping from the left, so we lay the thread over, pick the thread up from the right, cross the thread over, and then roll, thumb on, finger on, roll the blank, thumb on, finger on, roll the blank, until we've got at least 3 turns. Now trapped, pick up the thread, which is going to be the waist, trim off, and away we go. Again, keep these turns of thread tightly butted up to each other, but if you do get a small gap when you've finished, don't worry about it. We can always spread the thread to fill up any gaps. And remember, take your time as you approach the foot of the ring. Take your time and the thread will just climb up the tapered foot, like so. Now we can remove the narrow piece of masking tape that we used to tape the ring to the blank. And this time we don't stop when we reach the angle between the legs of the ring and the foot itself. What we're going to do is to put approximately another dozen turns past the legs of the ring to act as locking turns. They hold everything in place. Now what we're doing this time, we open a spiral, and then we put about another 10 turns, and don't put too much pressure on. About like that. Trap. Cut. Thread through. Now pull under and under those threads like so. Having done that, you now ease that down like so, pull on the waist end quite sharply, tightens everything up, and then just go around with your thumbnail like so. Now all that remains is open up the gap for us to trim off with our sharp scalpel blade. Quick scratch with your nail, and hey presto. Only thing left to do with the whippings now, apart from the varnishing, is, if you require it, to put on the contrasting coloured tippings. They look nice, and in the old days, before the epoxy resin finishes, they helped to protect the main whipping. Dead easy, exactly like doing an ordinary whipping, but you put the pull-through loop in immediately. You cross over the thread. Put about 6 turns on, like so. Trap. There's the pull-through loop. Cut off. Pop the end through the loop. Pull under. And now if you just gently roll the end round, the two ends trap each other underneath the turns of thread. That's all there is to it. Sharp blade. Trim off both ends. And then just snug our contrasting tipping up against the main. Now we come to the messy bit. And bear in mind, I do mean messy. If you're worried at all about your surfaces where you're doing this, make sure you've got a protective cloth on, because epoxy resin goes everywhere if you spill it. Now I've taken the paper cup that's in the kit and cut it down so it's only about 1.5 inches high, and these two syringes are the items that contain a British made epoxy resin finish. Now then, the clear is substance A, and you need to mix these 50-50. Now I normally reckon mix about 3 cc's. Now these come with 8 cc's in, but there's a little bit extra, and just squeeze away. 1, 2, 3. Don't forget to put the cap back on. And then the same amount of hardener, which is labelled B. 1, 2, 3. Now the brush that's supplied in the kit is a flat 1/4 inch Fitch. And with this, mix the two components together. Now, I don't know whether you can see, but they'll go cloudy to start with. And then a few seconds later, as they're fully mixed and the chemical reaction starts, it will go faintly yellow, but clear. Just allow a few seconds for some of the bubbles to clear. And what I recommend that you do is, when you're doing this, is to put the pot underneath each whipping as you do it. Get a good brushful of the epoxy and whack it on. The whipping will soak up quite a bit, and you'll notice that the whipping will start to change colour. Now, this is quite deliberate. We are not using any colour preserver. We actually want these whippings to go dark. And at each end, now can you see I'm overlapping onto the blank itself. At the foot end, just make sure that some of the finish has gone in underneath. Again, overlap onto the blank. Now, these finishes are self-levelling, and we can take advantage of the fact that carbon dioxide lowers the surface tension of the liquid. So where you see you've got a few bubbles, all you have to do, once you've got sufficient on, like this, is just breathe gently on the whipping, and all those little bubbles will burst.
Masking tape.
Once you've finished, you can remove the masking tape, which you've used to prevent any major overlap, any major catastrophes, and you just gently rotate the rod about every 15-20 seconds. Ring up, 20 seconds later, ring down, 20 seconds later, ring up again. The reason you do this is to stop the epoxy sagging. Professionally, we have a machine that rotates the rod about 100, 120 times a minute. So it's just going round nice and steadily. But for a one-off, you don't really need that. We've got a few air bubbles now starting to develop. The stuff is levelling itself beautifully now. Move that out of the way. And the way now to get rid of these fast is to warm them up. This flame obviously contains a lot of carbon dioxide, and it's the carbon dioxide that lowers the surface tension. And if you look now, not a bubble in sight. We still have to rotate about every 10, 15, 20 seconds. Rings down, rings up, rings down, rings up, and get yourself a good book. So you can sit and read a book and do this at the same time, because you have to rotate now for anything up to about 2.5 hours. The epoxy resin is currently liquid. It will go to a gel, and from the gel it will set. But the total setting time can be anywhere between 10 and 15 hours, depending on the temperature. Once it's set, the shrink tube has already been applied to the butt by us, so there's no worries there. Pop your winch fittings on, either coasters, or if you've specified a Fuji winch fitting, pop your reel on and we'll take you down on the beach and we'll show you what this thing will do. Right, rod's complete. We're down on the beach now. Pulled it down, we put the reel in the high position, and the rod was actually designed with the high inertia type cast in mind, so it's got a specially reinforced tip to take into account the forces that this cast is capable of generating. So I put the lead on the inside instead of on the outside. Left hand nice and high and well away from me, reel out of gear, head round, look up. Well, I should think it's probably 175, 180 yards. No problem at all. This is the worst bit, getting it all back again. One of the reasons why we designed this rod and came up with this concept is that there are an awful lot of people who want a Ziplex, and quite frankly, they haven't really got the know-how to use the real top-of-the-range type rods. I've seen people struggling with hyper bullets and dream machines from the olden days, when in fact they would have done much better buying something like an NG3 or a Ziplex 2500. Well, this particular rod, the blank, was built by Terry Carroll, trying to emulate what the old Quattras used to do, only utilising some of the newer materials, but at the same time maintaining that nicely reinforced tip to enable us to do this high inertia cast. Some people call it a Brighton cast, some people call it a Unitech cast, but for me it utilises the weight trying to stay in the centre of the arc. Now what I'm doing, same sort of drop again, about down to the bottom ring, same thing again, lead, inside arc, reels out of gear, all ready to go, head round, look up, nice and high. A little bit further that time I would have said, probably near 190. But you'll notice complete lack of effort, which is what it's all about. Well, I should think it's probably got a ceiling around about 210, 215 in this, guys. But to show this has got a true thoroughbred sparkle, we're going to mount the reel low on the butt, put in a removable reducer to enable us to wind in easily, and I've brought Mike down, who's a 260 plus caster, to really put it through its paces.
Right, Phil, I believe we're here to try out this new rod, see how far it'll go.
Well, I've had a couple of goes with it off the ground, and it's up to you now to give it a bit of a pasting.
See what it'll do.
That's it.
That sounds fair to me.
I'll get well out of the way, because I know you use the new style.
Yeah,
Callan used
the
for his
Callan
300 yarder.
Or near the Callan
Yeah,
stuff.
just chuck it on the ground. Be all right. Right.
There we go. It's right for the first attempt, I suppose.
That's not bad at all, is it? Oh, teeth. How much line left on the reel?
Oh, I'd say about 60, 70 yards, something like
So
that.
you must have taken off 220, 225, something like that.
Well, for a reel with
Not
that
bad for a first
capacity.
cut.
Yeah.
Especially not bad for a rod that's not designed for ultra long range casting. That certainly went.
Well, it feels like a nicely balanced rod, so I think it's a rod that most people can actually use.
Well, that was the idea in the first place.
Yeah.
One of the problems, of course, is that as rods got more and more powerful, fishing tackle sort of didn't go the way of cars. Cars, you buy a Ford or you buy a GTI, but you don't really want to buy a Ferrari.
That's right.
See, these ultra high powered rods are a bit the sort of fishing's equivalent of a Ferrari. People go and buy them and they can't use them. They're just far too powerful. I mean, we've got you up around about 260, 270 now, and this rod isn't designed to do that.
Although it's not that far off by the feel of it, Phil. It does seem to give a little bit of poke when you need it.
Well, the blank manufacturer reckons it'll peak out around 250, but not many people in the country can do anywhere near that. So the essence of it is it's a rod that's easy to use if you want to do just the simple high inertia off the ground cast. Bends sweet as a nut, dead easy to use, but the recovery is very quick. You might have noticed that. Bent very easily and just went whop.
Yes.
Suddenly.
It does lock up solidly as well, doesn't it?
Well,
Yes.
what happens, of course, is the whole rod bends, including the butt. In the past, if you made a rod with a parabolic type action, as it recovered, it overshot. Right, because it didn't go absolutely rigid. And of course, what compounded the problem was heavyweight rings, which is something that we try and persuade people that big, heavy, mega rings are not a good idea on an ultralight surf rod.
Yeah, so these obviously are the lighter ones.
These are the lighter ones.
Yes.
Putting the heavier ones on a blank like this is a bit like putting the seats out of a Paul Canard on a racing car. You know,
Yeah.
they just don't match properly.
I suppose with a rod that's fairly thin diameter with heavy rings, like you say, it overshoots itself and it demands more line.
Oh yes.
So
Takes line off that the lead doesn't need, gives it back to the lead, and no presto, instant crack off.
yeah,
And that was one of the problems that they had in these years ago. Crack off after crack off. Especially with the reels that they were using at the time, which didn't have, shall we say, centrifugal aids or magnetic aids to make things easier for people.
right then, Phil. I'll just give you the reducer and we'll try again. See if we can do any better.
I'll get out of the way.
Okay, that's the best thing.
$100, $150, $180.
Oops.
Bloody hell.
There you go.
Further than last time, I think.
Yes, it might have been a little bit further. I didn't quite get it right, that one. But yeah, it's gone fair way. What do you reckon that was then?
Certainly over 220,
Yeah,
probably a bit further. Can I have a go?
certainly can, yes. It is your rod.
Yeah, shall I want it in? No, it's not mine. Yeah, I'll bring it in.
There you go. Bit quicker than I am at that.
The thing with this, when we tried it out, we put a spring balance onto the rod and started pulling. And we found that we had one chap actually managed to pull the spring balance to 20 pounds through the rod, which is an astonishing pull.
Yeah.
But
It'll take a bit of doing, won't it? Yeah.
oh god, yeah, you really are putting some beans on it. But the interesting thing is that the curve of the rod didn't collapse. You didn't end up with a sort of 3 foot long straight section pointing straight at the spring balance. The curve somehow rolls down the rod beautifully.
Is it quite a thick walled rod?
Oh yeah,
or-
it's pretty thick.
Yeah.
Well, not me the Irish, I mean it is a genuine thick-walled blank. But it's not that heavy, that's the amazing thing. For a rod that's, what, 12 foot 8 long, plus the extension down the bottom. Oh, here it comes. There's a bit of weed out there, but it's not too bad.
Nearly there.
Right,
Okay.
I'll have a go.
So you're doing the normal pendulum,
I shall
aren't you?
do a normal pendulum.
Right, okay, I'll take that off you. The beat seems clear, so...
Haven't got the hang of this new
Oils.
one yet. Maybe about. Right. What Mike was doing was swinging the lead away and bringing it back into what was almost a high inertia cast back there, but not letting the lead touch the ground and sweeping round. What I'm going to do is put the lead on the ground, push down with the left hand, flick the lead away, let it climb back up again, head round, which is just a nice easy fishing cast.
That's a nice one, Phil. Nice and smooth as always. There you go, I think we need that one.
Well,
one way to reel in and out.
what you really need with this game is youth, power and speed. I'm missing most of them these days. I'm getting a bit old.
Well, I think you do fine with your technique now, Phil, so don't worry about that. There we go. It's another successful cast.
Let's give it one more go.
Yeah, let's see what I can do with it this time.
This time we'll really give it some welly.
Right, okay. I'll give you that one there, Phil.
Thank you very much.
Okay, got it. Right. Beach seems to be clear, so that's all right. That one seems to be going all right.
Stone me.
Yeah, that's a bit further anyway. Wouldn't like to guess what that was.
Oh, that'll pan the critics, won't it? Right, we'll get that in, have a little look. I should think you're probably looking at around about 235 there, something like that.
Generally, as a rod, it feels very good. I mean, as you know, I do more tournaments than anything at the moment, but I'd quite happily use this for fishing as well. So it seems ideal, really. I mean, it's got all the power you'd need. I just can't complain with it, really.
Well, one of the things that we've tried to do is we've thought along the lines that a lot of users use fixed spool reels. These can be a problem with an ultra fast tapered tip where the tip just collapses over. You have to use slightly heavier rings, slightly bigger diameter, and they can then quite easily overload a very fine tip circle. Whereas this thing's got a nice heavy, it's actually unground the tip on this, so there is, I wouldn't say a possibility, there's an absolute certainty that a fixed spool user would have no problem at all using this. And what we've done is we've got a set of ring spacings all ready for the fixed spool user. And of course the fixed spool user wouldn't use coasters, he would have a fixed reel seat. So we've thought about the, people tend to denigrate them, but I think in a lot of cases fixed spool users are only fixed spool users because nobody's really shown them how to use a multiplier anyway. But in fact, if they do decide to go over the multiplier, it's no problem changing them over.
Right, I see, yeah. I say with the fixed spool, you won't need this either, would you?
No, they won't need that. Well, that's an optional extra anyway.
Yeah. Got a read out there, Phil.
Not bad at all. Well, I'm being pestered by Liam, who's desperate to get his sticky little fingers on this little item, so I suppose I'll better get it packed up and shunt it off to him. I haven't even got one myself yet. I wouldn't mind letting him have the day.